me. I had to.
Oh, there we go.
Welcome, everyone. I am Donna Qualls. I'm the Executive Director of FISPA. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have the pleasure of introducing one of our FISPA vendor members, Netskrt, a valued partner in our resource network. NetSkrt Systems offers a radically new type of content delivery network, a CDN, an edge cache that ensures high quality on-demand and live streaming video in the hardest to reach points on the internet. The NetSkrt Edge CDN is positioned at the extreme edge and in the last subnet in the ISP networks onboard planes and trains. Cloud-based title and network-aware content management predictively loads content onto these caches, giving customers the at-home in the city viewing experience wherever they are. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speakers today, Kevin Walsh and Steve Miller-Jones with NetSkrt. Kevin, I'm going to turn this over to you to start the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Donna. And thank you to FISPA for providing us with this platform. We are a big fan of FISPA. Look forward to seeing most of you next, I guess, February, maybe in New Orleans, if that's still on track. So I'm pleased to have with me my colleague, Steve, and we're going to talk about live sports streaming and how it's impacting ISP networks. And I'm sure most of you have been familiar with video for a long time, but it's been of the VOD type, not of the, for the most part, not of the streaming of live sporting events. And as Steve and I will talk about here today, that does change the nature of what we have to do with our network. So before getting too deeply into it, again, I'm Kevin Walsh. I work with ISPs for NetSkrt, and I'm with Steve Miller-Jones. Steve is actually the smart, of the two of us, Steve is the smart one. So if you have questions, certainly you want to ask him of Steve. Steve has deep roots in streaming video. He was part of the, or is part of the Streaming Video Alliance, the digital TV group, I think is what it is, Steve. But really pleased to have him, and Steve runs product strategy for NetSkrt. So Steve, welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm glad you qualified the statement that I'm the smart one, and you said of the two of us, that was definitely worthwhile. Thank you. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be the speaking with you on this webinar. And as you say, I look after product strategy here at NetSkrt. I have a history in the CDN and streaming media industry. We are, as NetSkrt, part of the Streaming Video Technology Alliance, as you said. I've co-chaired the distribution working group for the DTG in the UK as well. Our webinar attendees might be able to tell that I've got a British accent. I am based in the UK on the south coast, basking in glorious sunshine for at least today. So summer is finally here for one day a year, which is great. And yes, I've been in the CDN and associated streaming media industry for about 15 years. I've worked sort of in operations in a big CDN. I've run the product management group in the same CDN also for a period of time, and sort of got a range of experience across, working with big and small content customers to deliver large and small events or ongoing content delivery. I think this year will be the fourth time I've been involved in the Olympics on the internet. So, they're pretty sizable events, and they've changed over time. Done a number of World Cup football matches. I was a point operations person for the royal wedding in the UK some years ago now. Yeah. So,
well, wait a second. Which royal wedding?
Oh, the only one that's worth talking about.
Okay.
Kate one. William and Kate. William and Kate.
Okay.
I was when I worked at Limelight Networks, I was point operations for that event. So, I've done my fair share of live events. I even used to sit in satellite trucks, getting the signal into an encoder and out from horse racing events and things like that. So it's exciting to be on this side talking with ISPs about how do we make these things work, these live events actually work for the networks as much as for the content owners. So pleased to be here.
Good. Pleased to have you, Steve. So we're gonna dive into it now. I've spent the better part of the last year talking to about 400 ISPs, mostly in North America, and I think I have a pretty good feel for what the world looks like to these ISPs, and it's all over the map in terms of wireless and fiber, rural and urban. So in this little webinar, I'm going to pretend like I'm a ISP and I'm asking questions of Steve, who's the subject matter expert. So let's dive into it here, if I can control everything correctly. So as I said at the outset, VOD, or streaming video, Steve could speak to this more eloquently than I can, but it's been at least 10 or 15 years where it's been fairly common. And now it is the most common form of video consumption, at least in the US, is unicast streams over the top of broadband networks. So I think most ISPs are pretty comfortable with what that looks like. They've been handling it well for a number of years. But along comes live OTT streaming. And I guess the question, Steve, is how significant really is that? How much impact or how real is that?
Yeah, it's a good question because you look at the history of streaming, and we all remember the days when there was a tiny little Windows Media Square on the MSN homepage that was live stream of some tiny concert or something, and it was a really small bit of the screen real estate. And did people really watch that? Through to stuff we do in some of the passenger environments where some of the consumer behavior is a bit different, and people say, well, I won't watch it in this passenger environment. I'll wait till I can do it on catch up at home. And we've sort of heard that. But really, what we know today from a consumer perspective is if I go buy a TV, it's internet connected. If I buy a device for my pocket, like a phone, it's internet connected and it plays video. And what we also know, of course, is that most of the live events, most of the biggest live events that have ever been distributed on the internet have all happened in the last year. And we're seeing enormous amounts of activity in the rights space around what is available for delivery on the internet. And it's not limited to the US. There's enormous activity on this across Europe. Out of the largest online streamed events in the last year, couple of the NFL events made it into that list. The biggest ones outside of the US are actually in India for the IPL Cricket League. They are the single largest events of online streamed video ever. We're all last year, top 10, all last year. So there's no doubt that live sports is delivered over the top. Live events are delivered over the top. We all watch news. If there's an election of some kind, we'll watch it wherever we can. So definitely here to stay. The slide you switched to definitely tells the story of live sports from the perspective of where is the money going for the rights. And on the one hand, we love talking about technology and being in the depths of this is how it works. At the consumer end, why is it that it doesn't matter that my TV is connected to the internet. I just turn it on and I watch TV. The consumer doesn't really care that it comes across the internet or not. From the other side, the commercial side of the business, this is where the action is. And the numbers on the screen are pretty significant in terms of how much money is being spent by the streaming platforms in order to have almost exclusive access to these types of events. And this is just from last year, right? So
Yes, sir, last year.
This tells the compelling story of when I want to see my team in action in the National League sport of whatever it might be, where am I going to watch it? Turns out you're going to watch it on a streaming platform or a platform whose brand is associated with delivering over-the-top video. We've seen, and I think you might come on to talk about this, but we've seen there's going to be excitement around what's happening on Christmas Day with Netflix, right? So, they are a pure play. Maybe they grew out of sending DVDs to my home, but they're a pure play OTT platform. And, hey, they're beginning to put their money into the live streaming part as well.
Yeah, and I did notice that speaking of rights this year, the NBA is in the midst of auctioning off various parts of their 10-year franchise, and they're expecting $76 billion in total for those rights. So
Yeah.
there's still a lot of activity underway.
I mean, a question about why as well in that, if you think about it from broadcast TV, it was kind of like you can sell your rights for a period of time, for a point in time, right? What they've worked out as well, of course, in the right side is they can slice the rights into a lot of different packages.
Yeah.
And so they're able to almost sell the rights more than once for different formats, for different platforms, for different methods of access. And so, it's kind of like the technology is matured enough to a point where it's now that the leagues and other sporting bodies and other event-based bodies are like, the technology is mature enough for us to rely on it, so let's go. And that's kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah. It does, by the way, create a problem for the consumer. And we're not going to address this in this webinar. Maybe it'd be a whole nother webinar, but the consumer is a little bit frustrated because they know, as you say, Steve, it's going to be available on some streaming platform, but they first got to figure out which streaming platform and whether or not they are a subscriber to that platform. And I know that one of the NFL playoff games in this most recent season was streaming only, and it caused a bit of consternation among consumers. But evidently, the money is more important to the NFL than the consternation among the consumers.
Yeah, I mean, if we sort of take a macro look at the platforms for a minute, and this is a rabbit hole we shouldn't go down too much, but you can kind of think about it. And I think there were a couple of reports about this, that there's a strong behavior for, I think they called it burn and churn or something. So you pay for access and you quickly stop paying because right. So, okay, I bought my subscription, I paid my subscription for this month, and then I canceled. And so the video platforms are doing a lot to add tiers of advertising, so lowering their barriers to entry for your share of wallet. And they're also concerned about getting and keeping subscribers. So from the consumer perspective, maybe you can bounce around a lot, and there's a lot of talk about aggregation as well, and there's a lot of talk about, well, I'll buy this from here and that from there and that from there, and maybe there's consolidation over time, but ultimately it's still the same people trying to watch the same content. There is still that many devices trying to watch the game. And so yes, the landscape of the streaming providers will no doubt change and morph and shift over time, but we're still with my device in hand going, I want to play it now, please. And that's still the reality.
Yeah. And I think this slide speaks to a lot of that. It was an eye-opener for me when I came across it, that this is the top 100 programs in the U.S. last year. Now, as Steve mentioned, there were bigger programs outside the U.S., but so just within the U.S., maybe not a surprise to a lot of you, 96% of them were sporting events, and 95% of them were football, and 92% were NFL. And I think, I don't have the data here, but I think 23% had Taylor Swift in attendance. So probably had some impact on it, but just a sign of where things are going. And by the way, I should also point out, we should applaud Steve's ability to use the word football when he's talking about the National Football League in the US, as opposed to what he really thinks of as football in the UK.
Everything's football. It's fine.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. So that's great. Get all that. But what for me, the ISP, Steve, what does that really mean in terms of how I think about, run, plan my network? Capacity planning, engineering, things like that. How should I be thinking about this?
Yeah, so there's sort of few aspects to this. We can best describe this, I think, in the starting point by talking about how it's different from video on demand in some ways, and we'll talk about proximity in a second as well. But when someone's watching a piece of video on demand, the player that they're using, which might be my phone or the device I'm using, my phone that connects to television, my tablet, whatever, it has a piece of software in it that's controlling playback. And for video on demand, the asset's fixed, right? The player essentially gets enough information to work out how big it is, and it might do a big burst of download to start with, and then it all works in small chunks, lots of requests across the life of that piece of video on demand. And it has a buffer, and it can fill it up, and it might choose to fill up a bit more for a piece of VOD, and then it has a good experience over a period of time because it knows how long the video is. For a live stream, really a fundamental that we need to understand is that the rate of request and response is going to be consistent across the duration of the event. It won't be a lot to start with and then a little every now and then, right? It's going to be a high level of request and response with constant bytes delivered to each player, each user throughout the event. So live and VOD are fundamentally, although the streaming format is the same, they're fundamentally different in how the bytes are consumed by the devices. And so this generates a difference in behavior in your ISP about what I'm seeing from my connected devices. So my connected devices, when we start watching a live stream, there's an environmental factor to consider. First of all, the live stream is starting at 5:45 p.m. That's when kickoff is, or whatever the time is. Most games have a little pre-show warm-up and a bunch of people talking, and some people watch that, some people don't. Effectively, what happens is there is a group of people who want to watch the game when it starts, and I would refer to that as the thundering herd. They will arrive at the same time, looking for the stream. They've pressed play, give or take, or they're requesting that object for that live start kickoff of that game at the same time. Now, that's fundamentally different from video on demand. Video on demand, you start watching series 3, episode 5 of whatever the latest hit show is at a different time from me, right? We might both like it and we'll talk about it at the water cooler tomorrow, no problem. However, we don't start watching it at the same time unless it's a live, it's an event-based thing. So everyone arrives at the same time. And that is a fundamental difference between VOD and live. Everyone arrives at the same time looking for the same thing with a consistent rate of request and response thereafter. And so the challenge of this thundering herd is, how do you get them all through? If you think about it like a stadium, you extend the analogy to the actual game. How do you get them through the turnstiles? Well, obviously, some people arrive slightly before other people, right? And then there's a whole load of people and they get held up. There's congestion, right? So in a streaming world, we take the people that arrived first because they ran fastest. They were closest to the gateway, the ISP gateway, and we use their request to seed the distribution, because we can, as a CDN, we can take the first request and we can repeatedly deliver it for everybody else. So to put that in context a bit more for your ISPs, these users are effectively some distance away from where the content is being produced in an encoder and being sent out into the internet, some maybe hundreds of milliseconds away. They are, however, very close to the ISP access network. My house is pretty close by in milliseconds terms to the gateway that I'm going to break out to the wider internet from. CDNs kind of typically sit in the middle. So around peering points, maybe IXs and above, typical CDNs are spread out there, and they are talking to these origins, these locations where the encoded feed from the field is being sent to be sent out, delivered on request to these end users. And these CDNs typically sit a bit further upstream from your ISP access gateway. So our problem here is that we've got this thundering herd of people arriving, and they've all got to go through the ISP access network to get to the CDN. And the CDN their job is to give the bits to everybody. So for everybody in your network, where this is the case, everyone has to traverse your gateway and go upstream across your upstream connectivity to get to the CDNs, and they all get their individual copy flowing back across the internet to them. And so that creates a problem in the ISP, because you haven't been able to, you've had to let all of the thundering herd run past you and then come back again, right? You haven't been able to go, you guys wait over there, you wait there, you wait there, I'll go get it and give it to you, right? This guy got here first, he's going to go get it for everyone and give you all a copy. It's a bit of a terrible analogy, but there's been no opportunity to make the delivery of those chunks scale. Everyone's requesting the same thing at the same time. and will do repeatedly from there on for some period of time. And you haven't been given a choice about whether or not you can deal with that within your network. And that's a problem of live. And that request and response flow, what happens to the player if my request is delayed is that the player thinks, well, I wasn't able to get that piece of data very quickly. I asked for, make it up. I asked for an HD version of that stream because I've got a big, I asked for a 4K version. I've got a big connected TV on my wall. I asked for the 4K video. Turns out, didn't get it very quickly. So I'll ask for a slightly lower bitrate. I'll ask for a rendition that's slightly lower quality. And then, everyone's kind of performance decreases. And this congestion creates these range of scenarios for different users where they're going to get a variable experience watching the game. It's basically the worst case. The worst case is that everyone gets an error. It wasn't possible to connect you in time, and the server timed out and said, I don't want to deal with that request, and it threw it away. And the player goes, sorry, an error happened. The next worst thing is it's taking a really long time to get the bits back, and you see the spinning buffering wheel, and it's taking a while to fill up the buffer. And then, you might get a frame from time to time and it might refresh. And then you end up kind of a pretty long way behind the action as well. So you hear your neighbor shouting because they're really excited that their team scored a touchdown. And you're like, oh, I don't know which team it was, So all of those things come into play. And that's not a VOD problem. The VOD problem is quite discrete. If you've got a lot of people watching a wide variety of video on demand at the same time, you get a similar problem. There's lots of people are requesting content at the same time, but they're not requesting the same thing. And so this idea that we're all requesting the same thing from the same place creates a much more focused set of activity and potential for congestion. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thundering herd. I like that. I'm gonna hang on to that one, Steve.
Yeah, I think buffaloes, they're all coming.
So I guess a little bit more, once we're up and running and traffic is moving, one of the things I think you've mentioned in the past, Steve, is the peak to average bandwidth ratio, and I liken it to, for those of us old enough that remember calling our mother on Mother's Day back in the a couple of decades ago when we had to use those wireline telephones, we got busy signals quite often because clearly the network engineering wasn't sufficient to handle that peak. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so here what we're looking at is, I'd call it peak to average ratio. Your average ratio is how many bits are flowing to you through your network, your sort of average rate in a day. And the ratio of that to your peak is, how much bigger is your peak than your average? And on a general day, across the day, when there's no specific time-based event that's going to drive attention, your peak to average ratio is going to be relatively consistent. There might be a time of week variation to that. There might be a time of year variation to that, possibly a time of month variation to that, if there's a vacation or something from school. But typically it's going to be pretty consistent, and it's not going to be enormous. You're seeing that in the blue here on the left. What you're seeing on the right, and I think this is data from our network, the peak to average ratio in the Super Bowl was off the charts. Well, not literally off this chart, but it was significant in multipliers of it was a multiplication of the peak to average ratio. The peak is enormous versus the average. And that is because it's at a point in time where everyone's trying to do it at the same time, and then for a short period of time. So you've got to have a network fabric, an environment that can handle that to your consumer at home, from your gateway down to their whatever your connectivity you're offering to your ISP subscriber is. And you've got to consider then essentially I've got to send that upstream. And then you're into the vagaries of, well, what's my upstream connectivity? Have I put in place connectivity that can handle that many gigabits per second up to my peering links, through my transit links? And what if they're congested? What if I'm connected to an IX upstream? I'm connected at 100 gig and 10 others are connected at 100 gig to them, their fabric, and they're all overloading it. What is that fabric connected to? And so on and so on. And suddenly the peak to average ratio in your network is, okay, that's big, but I can handle it. But you've got to go somewhere else to get the content. And that's out of your control. And again, you don't know what's happening up there. The network paths might vary. But the peak to average ratio, as evidenced here, is enormous on a significant live event. Now, weekly average game throughout the TNF season, Thursday, the football season, for example, might be a bit smaller than the Super Bowl, but it's still going to be higher than your sort of daily peak to average ratio. So that ratio of peak to average is a pretty important one to think about when managing capacity, obviously.
Yeah, and it matters too. What we've seen a lot of this. Who is playing on a typical night, and so in that region, they'll tend to see a much higher peak.
Yeah, I mean, regions make a difference. Like who's playing is interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Time of day.
Whether or not they've got a good football team, that matters too. So
yeah, will people stay up on the East Coast to watch their team playing on the West Coast is the question.
Yeah, I can say I would not, but that's just me. Okay, I think we want to leave a little bit of time for a Q&A. So the last question is, okay, well, great, Steve, you've convinced me that that there's well, I'll stay with the thundering herd element bearing down on me. What should I do?
Yeah, so the challenge from our perspective is that there are a number of techniques you can use. So, you could say, well, I built my network to cater for the subscribers that are connected to me, and I've got some upstream capacity. You could just overbuild your upstream capacity. You could just lay in a load of capacity you've paid for, but it's not a particularly effective solution because you're still relying on things upstream of you to get the packets to your consumers. So you could build to a 2x capacity, a 10x capacity of your peak to average to cater for one event a year. Doesn't sound like a great use of your capital, right, to deploy for one game a year. And then you've got no guarantee that the quality of experience your subscribers are going to get is even going to be any better, because you're not in control of what's happening upstream of you. You're relying on someone else. So, you could do it differently, and some of the ISPs you've spoken to sort of say, well, I built my network in a certain way, and if I have to go to the next level of network architecture, I'm going to have to separate sites, I'm going to have to do DWDM, I'm going to have to do a whole load of things that are going to just make it a whole lot more complex to operate. And so I'm building in operational costs for the scale of network that I need to build. And then that is difficult, and you're going to have to pass those costs on to your subscribers, which no doubt no one will like you for, particularly when they've already got symmetrical gigabit per second. Like, why the hell do I have to pay more money? I've already, what did you have to do? So network efficiency in the last mile, in the subnet that's serving your subscribers is sort of a good place to look at and say, how do I make the best use of this set of capacity that I have here? And we believe that one of the methods that you can use there is to bring the content in across the gateway into the network. That means that thundering herd have somewhere to connect to that's inside your network. And we can go back to that slide in a minute. But yeah, let's start with this one. This is the good thundering herd analogy. On the left-hand side, the thundering herd arrived at the gateway to the game, and then they all went straight past you and went upstream, and you have to maintain open connections and bits flowing between upstream and your subscribers. So you've got to handle that level of capacity. And again, you don't know what's happening upstream beyond that pier and whether it's going to work for them. On the right-hand side, you've got a case where you've held the thundering herd within your network environment. And you said, okay, you can all come here, and I'm going to keep you here, and I'm going to serve you from within my network. And so there's a cache, an edge native CDN cache in your network that's able to deliver the content to the consumer. Of course, it has to get the content from somewhere. And so we'd use a term, maybe we use the term request collapsing. And again, in the thundering herd, someone arrives first, right? Always someone arrives first. That guy who's just a bit faster than you out of the parking lot, got to the turnstile before you did, got right to the front of the concert. You know, we all hate that guy. But anyway, someone always arrives first. And you use their request to go, and you have to go and get the content for upstream, because it's a live event. That those bits don't exist in your network, so you have to go and get them. But you ask everyone else to wait. So you collapse the requests from the thundering herd large number down to a small number for each variation that you need. Android is different from Apple. Thanks very much, Apple. And you know, some of the big screens use slightly different variations, and people have different bit rates. So there are a number of requests that have to go upstream. For each sort of 3 to 6 seconds of video you're going to watch, a request has to be made. So you want to reduce the number going upstream as much as possible. So you collapse the requests, you keep the thundering herd at bay, you collapse the request, and you take one, you go and get the content, you bring it back, and then you give it to everybody at once. So you do this methodology of collapse the request, fetch the content, fill the cache, send it, and then you keep everyone with you. And what you're doing then is you're essentially controlling the volume of upstream traffic that you're having to send, the number of upstream connections that are being maintained from within your network to upstream from your network. And that cache is probably reasonably effective at controlling any packet loss it experiences, so it can make sure it gets the whole chunk before it delivers it to everybody. Right? So everyone kind of gets the same stuff. And so putting something in the network like what Netskrt have developed in our Edge CDN and this Edge native cache that we have helps to reduce how many requests are going upstream, and you get to reduce your reliance on upstream connectivity, your reliance on someone else's network management to get rid of or cater for or work around congestion. And you're essentially in a better position to manage your network for delivering quality of experience to your consumers that they really expect, right? They're expecting to get a high quality of experience from my big connected TV on my symmetrical gigabit per second broadband. And hey, you know what? The content owner who has bought the rights, who's spent some ridiculously large amount of billions of dollars on the rights, they're expecting that consumer with that big TV, with their symmetrical broadband, to be able to get the HDR rendition of their content too. And so it's about closing that gap, right? Putting the cache in the network helps to close that gap. And if we go back to the previous slide, the real sort of problem in here is this so-called middle mile quandary. It's not under management by the content supply, and it's not under management by the network that's actually providing the subscriber. And it's a bit fuzzy. And there are a number of players in there, and there may sort of essentially be a mismatch in expectation of what it's for. Now, everyone lays in capacity, everyone builds capacity into the network so that these events can be handled, and they are typically handled pretty well, but actually no one's looking after it from the perspective of the subscriber ISP. They're looking after it from individual perspective. So in the middle mile, the impacts to congestion affect a lot of people. They affect a lot of ISPs. And so being able to bring some of that into your own control in your ISP puts you in a better position to manage your upstream connectivity. Also helps you ensure to your subscribers that are going to get the best experience that they expect to get, I think.
Perfect. And then I don't know if you want to talk to this. This is the last slide, and then we got a few questions that came in that I want to hit before we wrap it up.
From our side, what does Edge native CDN mean compared to other CDNs? Just sort of give a bit of context for people on the webinar who may be somewhat familiar with what another CDN does and why are we different. We have a a set of infrastructure in the traditional CDN locations that we use for, like, what you might call in modern parlance a control plane, if you like. We look after our edges and manage them from there. We can use them for fallback locations. We can use them for what you might call a mid-tier cache as well. So we maintain a set of capacity and infrastructure in a traditional CDN location, but we also deploy and exclusively do this, I think, deploy and manage edges that are designed to fit into the subscriber network, the final subnet, if you like, Star Trek reference. We're in the final subnet, Jim. Don't know what we're going to find next, but no, we're in the final subnet, and we are managing that cache explicitly for that environment. And so we do things like pre-positioning of VOD content so that that cache is effective, because it's a small cache and it's serving a broad group of people. What are they likely to watch versus just reacting to what they do watch, which is what most CDNs do. They just react to what they're asked for. We're a bit smarter than that, and we look at what is likely to happen here and what should we put into cache. So we sort of get a bit smarter about VOD as well. And for live, we provide this direct benefit of being able to hold the users in the network. And we're able to do that to effectively deliver high quality live streams to a broad audience at that point. So we have a traditional CDN look as well as the piece that fits into the final network, the final subnet.
Perfect. And by the way, I was going to try to do a Scotty imitation in response to your "we're in the final subnet," Jim, but my Scottish brogue is really not that good, so I decided best to avoid it. So thanks a lot, Steve. That was really good. We did get a few questions. One of them actually from a few people,
okay,
and it does come up a lot, is, okay, really sounds great, but it sounds sort of proprietary, and proprietary is a bad word in this context. Is it?
I mean, not really. I mean, the caching is a function of how the internet works, I suppose, is a good way to put it. And so that there's a wide set of standards defined by people like the IETF and other working groups who had a lot of patents over time on what is caching, how does HTTP work, how does a content provider declare enough information to make a cache work, and those are pretty well known, and some of them are highly standardized, and so the method that not the method the format of the content, for example, to deliver content to an Android device or big TV on the wall is something called, these days, typically called Dash. It's a Dash format, and it's got a whole set of specifications about how to create it. And for my Apple device, they've got a different one called HLS, and those are well defined. And so there's nothing proprietary that we are doing as Netskrt about delivering those formats to devices that can decode them and show them as pictures. So that side of it, no, we're operating within the norms of the wider internet. We behave like other CDNs behave. We're like the mailman. We deliver we don't know what's in the packages, but we deliver them, right? We don't look inside typically, and we send them whether we're being asked to send them. The proprietary part for us is we run our network in a specific way to make the cache work effectively for ISPs and their last subnets and their subscribers in their locations. And we do that for ISPs, we do it for remote communities, we do it for extra urban, we do it for all of the other use cases we have. So we've got some smarts in what we do, particularly around pre-positioning for VOD, but the methods that we're doing, we're augmenting methods that everyone else uses to deliver video on the internet. Okay. Delivering video on the internet is not proprietary, otherwise it wouldn't work.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a related question, and it's less about standards than about the involvement of the streaming provider, and whether it's a standard or not. And the question comes up: does the subscriber need to know about this? Do I need to change anything from their standpoint, or is this all identical to what they're currently doing when they hit play on their device. It's just the cache is closer.
Yeah, it's just going to work better, Kevin. They're just going to see magic happen faster. The subscribers need to know nothing, change nothing, do nothing. There are other CDN vendors in the space. Typically, a content owner is going to say, okay, someone's asked me for some content. I will determine which CDN should serve them, and they'll give them some options. So by that, I mean there's a list that gets given to the player, and the player works through the list. The subscribers don't know anything about that. And when Netskrt is added at the top of the list, because we're in your ISP and the content owner knows it, it's fully transparent to the subscriber. They don't need to buy a new device. They don't need to fiddle with a configuration. They don't need to go and put the left hand up when the wind's blowing east. Nothing like that.
Okay, good. So we got time for one more question, and I'm not sure what the distribution of attendees is across the country, but so it might be a joke of a question is who do we favor in the NBA playoffs? Personally, I won't hold you to this, Steve, because I suspect you might not be as much of a basketball fan as I am and some of our attendees are, but I'm going with the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think they're overdue, and I kind of like them.
Well, I used to live in Timber Lane in Pennsylvania, so I'll go with the Timberwolves too. There you go.
Okay, I forgot about that. That's right. And the Sixers aren't in it anymore, so you're stuck.
Yeah, they're not in it this year. Okay,
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. Well, good, Donna. Thanks again.
No, I just wanted to thank Kevin, you and Steve for this great session. I do appreciate you. Thank you to our attendees for joining us today. It was very valuable, and the explanation of why. One, I have poor bandwidth to my house, but when I do have it, it buffers. So now I have a good explanation as to why to tell my husband so he doesn't throw anything at the TV when we don't get our sports games.
Now you can tell them, I know what it is. It's the Thundering Herd. That's what's causing
the we can't blame the ISP anymore, which is not a local grassroots. It's a large carrier, which we all hate. So anywho. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for today. It was a valuable session. Again, thank you to our attendees. If you have any questions or would like for more information, thank you for popping that up. That was a perfect transition. To please reach out to me or to Kevin. We'll make sure that you guys had that information. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. So thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Donna.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.